A boot punched through a rotted floorboard. A woman pitched forward, both hands flying out to catch herself. Her belly hit the wood hard. She froze. One hand went straight to her stomach. The other gripped a splintered beam. For a long second, she couldn't breathe. Then the baby kicked. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and just sat there on the dusty floor of a house she had never wanted. She was 7 months pregnant. She was 61 days a widow, and the place she had just fallen through belonged to her now. Her name was Marigold Whitlock. She did not know what was waiting 12 feet above her in the attic. She did not know climbing those stairs would change everything she thought she knew about her husband. What Marigold found up there stopped her completely cold. Stay with me on this one. She'd driven up at 7 that morning. The road in was gravel, then dirt, then mostly weeds. The car bounced through ruts she could feel in her teeth. By the time the house came into view, she was already tired. It looked worse than the photos. The roof sagged on the left side. 2 windows were boarded up. The paint had given up years ago. The porch had a gap where a step used to be. The chimney leaned a little to the south, like it was thinking about lying down. Marigold sat in the car with one hand on her belly. The baby was quiet. That happened in the mornings. She closed her eyes and tried to remember Thomas's voice telling her about this place. But Thomas hadn't told her much. Thomas hadn't told her much about anything. Here's the thing about her husband. Thomas Whitlock was a kind man. Quiet. He taught history at a community college. He paid the bills on time. He laughed at her jokes even when they weren't funny. But there were parts of him he kept in a room she was never allowed inside. His family, his childhood, the years before he met her. He didn't talk about any of it. 8 weeks ago, a delivery truck had run a red light and ended that quiet life in about 3 seconds. She'd buried him on a Friday. The lawyer called the following Monday. There was a property in Thomas's name. A farmhouse he'd inherited 2 years earlier from an uncle named Augustus Whitlock. Thomas had never mentioned an Uncle Augustus. He'd never mentioned the farmhouse. He had a small life insurance policy, a savings account with $4,000 in it, and now this place out in the middle of nothing. She got out of the car. She walked up to the porch, one hand on the rail, one hand under her belly. The boards groaned but held. She fished the key out of her coat pocket. The lock stuck. She had to lean into it. Inside, the house smelled like a closed jar. She stood in the front hall and let her eyes adjust. There was an old hat rack with no hats. Wallpaper printed with roses, gone brown at the corners. A staircase going up. She moved room by room. The living room had a couch with one cushion missing. A piano against the far wall, 2 keys snapped off. A mantel over a cold fireplace. On the mantel, one thing, a framed photograph. She picked it up. 2 people. A young man in a dark suit. A young woman in a white dress that wasn't quite a wedding dress but might have been. They weren't smiling. On the back, in pencil, 3 words. Augustus and Elsie. She didn't know who Elsie was. The lawyer had not mentioned a wife. She put the photo back. The kitchen was the worst of it. Linoleum lifting at the seams. A stove from another century. A faucet that wouldn't turn. The real estate guy she'd brought out last week had told her everything before he opened his mouth. Foundations cracked, he'd said. Roofs 6 months from failing. Wiring's a fire waiting for an excuse. You could maybe get $12,000 for the land. Maybe. $12,000 wouldn't keep her and the baby in groceries for a year. She walked back into the hall and looked up. The ceiling had a square cut into it. A pull cord for the attic stairs hung down like a piece of string nobody had bothered to fix. She stared at it. She thought about the baby. She thought about her back. She thought about the lawyer telling her she shouldn't be doing this alone. Not in her condition. Believe me, she'd heard "in your condition" enough times in the last 2 months to last her the rest of her life. She reached up and pulled the cord. Nothing happened. She pulled harder. The cord came off in her hand. That right there was the moment she should have walked out. Should have closed the door. Should have called somebody the next morning. Instead, she went looking for a stepladder. And on her way through the upstairs hall, she put a boot down on a section of floor that had been hollow for 30 years. That was the floor that gave. She sat in the dust for a long time before she moved. Her boot was through the floor up to the shin. The wood at the edges was black, soft, the kind of rot that's been waiting for an excuse. She rocked her weight back, pulled the leg up, looked at the hole. She could see down into the kitchen. She started laughing. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh you do when you've used up everything else. When she stood up, she found the stepladder in a closet by the bathroom. She dragged it under the attic hatch. She climbed 3 rungs, pressed her palm flat against the square in the ceiling, and pushed. The stairs unfolded with a long, dry creak. Now here's where most people would call somebody. A friend, a brother, a neighbor, anyone. You don't climb into the attic of a 100-year-old house alone when you're 7 months pregnant. Even Marigold knew that. She just didn't have anyone to call. So she climbed. The first thing she noticed at the top of the stairs was that the air was cooler than she expected. Not stuffy. There was a round window at one end. Dirty, but intact. Light came through it in a wide, soft beam. The second thing she noticed was the sheets. White sheets. Old ones. Yellowed at the corners. They were draped over shapes. Big shapes. Some leaning against the walls. Some stacked. Some standing on their own. 20, 30 of them. She walked to the nearest one. She lifted the sheet by the corner. It was a painting. A canvas as wide as she was tall. Oil paint, thick in places, almost sculpted. A field at twilight with a single small house on the horizon and one window lit. The colors were deep, the kind of deep you only get from a person who knew exactly what they were doing. She let the sheet fall and pulled another one back. Another painting. Portrait. A woman in a chair, hands in her lap, looking off to one side. 25, maybe. Dark hair pinned up. An expression that wasn't quite sad but wasn't quite anything else. Marigold lifted the next sheet. A man and a child by a river. The next. A woman holding a baby in a wash of yellow light. The baby's eyes were open. The woman's mouth was just barely smiling. The next. A boy, maybe 6 years old, standing in a doorway, looking back over his shoulder. Marigold went still. She knew that face. She had a framed photograph of that face on her dresser at home. She had a wedding photograph of an older version of that face. She had spent 8 years sleeping next to that face. It was Thomas. It was Thomas as a child. She didn't understand. She stood there with the sheet bunched in her hand and tried to make her brain work. Thomas had grown up in Ohio. His parents were dead. He had no relatives, he'd said, except this Uncle Augustus he'd never met. He'd told her that. He'd said it more than once. But somebody had painted Thomas as a 6-year-old boy in a doorway. She let the sheet drop. She lifted the next one with hands that were starting to shake. Another portrait of Thomas, older. A teenager on a fence. The next one. Thomas at 20 in a graduation gown. Whoever lived in this house had been watching her husband his entire life. Marigold sat down on the attic floor, right where she was. She put both hands on her stomach and waited for the baby to kick. The baby kicked. She breathed in. She breathed out. She made herself stand back up. In the far corner of the attic, behind the last row of paintings, there was a chest. Wood. Dark. Iron bands around it. The kind of thing you saw in old movies. She walked over to it. There was a brass lock and no key in the lock. On the wall above the chest, on a nail, was a single key on a leather string. She took it down. She fit it into the lock. Turned. Inside the chest, 3 things. A bundle of letters tied with brown twine. Maybe 40 of them. The top envelope had 2 words written in pencil. To Henry. A leather-bound journal. Thin. Dark brown. Cracked along the spine. And a folded paper, sealed with red wax. The wax was unbroken. The paper was the color of old tea. She picked up the journal first. The handwriting was neat, the kind that belonged to a person who had been taught how to write. The first line was this: "I am writing this so somebody will know what really happened to Elsie." The next line was this: "I don't know yet who that somebody is going to be." Marigold sat down on the chest. Her back hurt. Her belly was tight. She read the next page and the next. Then her belly tightened in a way it hadn't before. A long, slow squeeze that started in her lower back and wrapped around to the front. She froze. She waited. She counted. The squeeze let go. False alarm. She'd had them before. Practice contractions. They didn't mean anything. They just felt like they did. She put the journal back in the chest. She closed the lid. She turned the key. She did not take any of it down with her. She told herself she'd come back tomorrow with a notepad and a chair and a plan. She told herself she had time. She climbed down the attic stairs and folded them back up. In the kitchen, she found a tin of tea bags that was probably 10 years old, and she boiled water on a stove that worked when she pressed the burner just right. She sat at the table with the cup in both hands. The sun was getting low. The house was warm in a way it hadn't been when she came in. All right, she thought. All right, tomorrow. She thought it was over. She had no idea. That's when the knock came. 3 loud raps on the front door. Hard. Confident. Like the person on the other side had every right to be there. Marigold set her cup down. She walked to the door slowly. She wasn't expecting anyone. The driveway was a quarter-mile of dirt road, and she had not heard a car pull up. She put her eye to the peephole. There was a man. Gray suit. No tie. Hair combed back. A polite, narrow smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him she could see the back end of a silver SUV she had not heard arrive. She opened the door but kept the chain on. "Mrs. Whitlock?" he said. "Who's asking?" "My name is Carter Reese. I'm with a property acquisition firm out of Pittsburgh. I was a friend of Augustus's. I'd been hoping to speak with the new owner." Now, stop right there. There were 3 things wrong with that sentence already. 1. Nobody had told this man she was the new owner. The deed had only been transferred to her name on Monday. 2. Augustus had been dead for 2 years. Anybody who had been his friend and wanted to speak to the new owner would have done it long before this. 3. He'd called her Mrs. Whitlock. Not by her first name. Like he wanted her to know that he knew exactly who she was. Marigold did not say any of that out loud. She said, "What's the offer?" He smiled wider. He liked that she'd cut to it. 40,000, he said. Cash. Today. House, contents, land, everything. I have the paperwork in my car. She made her face look surprised. That's actually generous," she said. "I was told the property wasn't worth much." "It isn't," he said. "We're buying the location. There's a parcel next door we already own. We'd like to combine them." There was no parcel next door. She knew because the lawyer had walked her through the survey last week. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away. "I'll think about it," she said. He didn't like that. His face stayed friendly, but the eyes got harder. "Mrs. Whitlock, I understand you have a child on the way. I understand the financial situation. $40,000 by tomorrow morning is a very serious number for a woman in your position." There it was again. In your position. She held her face still. "I'll think about it," she said. "I'll call you tomorrow." She closed the door before he could answer. She locked it. She slid the chain. She stood with her back against it until she heard the SUV start up and crunch back down the drive. Then she went straight back up to the attic. She brought the journal down this time, and the bundle of letters, and the sealed folded paper. She sat at the kitchen table and she read. Until 2 in the morning. Here's what she learned. Augustus Whitlock was not just a man who had lived in a falling-down house. Augustus Whitlock had been a painter. A real one. In his 20s he had moved to New York City. He had painted under a different name, because his family had not approved of an artist's son. The name he'd painted under was Atticus Wren. He had been good. He had been very, very good. He had shown in 3 galleries. There had been a write-up in a magazine. There had been a dealer who'd believed in him, a man named Vance Holloway. And then there had been Elsie. Elsie was a girl from a wealthy family who had no patience for painters. They had loved each other anyway. They had married anyway. Her family had cut her off. They lived in 2 rooms over a hardware store, and they were happy, and Augustus painted Elsie every chance he got. Elsie had gotten pregnant. Elsie had not survived the birth. The baby had a boy. And here is where the story turned. Elsie's family had come for the baby. They had a judge in their pocket. They told the judge that Augustus was an unstable artist who lived in 2 rooms over a hardware store, that he could not provide for a child, that Elsie had only married him in a moment of weakness. The judge agreed. They took the baby. They changed his name. They moved him out of state. Augustus had spent 6 years trying to get his son back. He failed. The family raised the boy as a nephew. He grew up not knowing who his father was. That boy grew up. He had a son of his own. That son was Thomas. Marigold's husband had been Augustus's grandson. And Augustus, after the courts took his son, had retreated to this farmhouse and spent the next 40 years painting. Just painting. Watching his son from a distance through people he paid. Watching his grandson from a distance through people he paid. Never reaching out. Until 2 years before he died, when he wrote one letter, one only, to a community college history teacher in Ohio. That letter was in the bundle. The original. Augustus had kept a copy. Thomas had come to meet him. Once. Augustus had given Thomas the deed to the farmhouse. He had not, Marigold realized, told Thomas about the attic. She put the journal down. Her hands were shaking. If you're still with me on this one, do me a favor right now, hit that subscribe button. Because what Marigold did next, and what was waiting for her in that sealed folded paper, is the part of this story I want you to hear. She picked up her phone. She opened a browser. She typed in 2 words. Atticus Wren. The first result was an auction record. A painting called Woman with Yellow Light had sold at Sotheby's in 2019 for $1.2 million. The second result was an article. The headline said, "The Vanished Painter Whose Last Known Work Sold for $2 million." The article said Atticus Wren had disappeared from the art world in 1979. It said his existing works were rare, prized, and authenticated only by the dealer who had known him personally. A man named Vance Holloway, still living, in his 80s, in Manhattan. Marigold counted the sheets she'd lifted in the attic. 34. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with the journal open and read until the sun came up. Then she made another cup of tea, and she sat with the sealed folded paper in her lap, and she looked at it. The wax was old, cracked at the edges but not broken. There was no name on the outside. She broke it. The paper inside was thicker than she expected. 2 pages, folded together. The handwriting was the same as the journal, but slower, more careful. The first line was this: "To the child my grandson might have." Marigold pressed her hand against her mouth. She read it twice before she could read it without her vision blurring. Augustus had written it 3 weeks before he died. He had written it not knowing if Thomas would ever marry, not knowing if there would ever be a grandchild, not knowing anything. He had written it as a hope, as a coin tossed across 40 years of silence. He wrote about Elsie. He wrote about losing his son. He wrote about the day he stopped painting under his real name and started painting in this attic with the door closed, for nobody. He wrote that he had kept painting because if he stopped, he would have nothing left of her. He wrote that he had kept the paintings because they were not his. They had never been his. They belonged to the woman he had not been allowed to keep, and the son he had not been allowed to keep, and the grandson he had not been allowed to know. He wrote in the last paragraph this: "If you are reading this, you are mine. The paintings are yours. The house is yours. The name is yours if you want it. I am sorry I could not be there. I tried. I have been trying my whole life. Marigold put the letter down on the table. She did not cry right then. She would. Later. For days. But right then she sat very still and felt the baby move under her hand. And she said out loud to nobody, "Okay, okay, okay." At 9 in the morning, the knock came again. This time it was harder. This time there were 3 of them. She looked through the peephole. Carter Reese. 2 other men behind him in dark coats. One of them was holding a briefcase. She didn't open the door. She spoke through it. "What do you want?" "Mrs. Whitlock, we'd like to revise our offer." "To what?" "80,000. Today. Cash." She stood with her forehead against the door and closed her eyes. "No." There was a pause. "Mrs. Whitlock, I'd like to be straight with you. The structural condition of that house is dangerous, especially for a woman in your situation. We're offering you a way out. Clean exit. $80,000 buys you a safe apartment, a hospital bill, and time. I don't think you understand what a generous offer that is." "I understand exactly what it is." "Excuse me?" She opened the door. Just the chain. She looked him in the eye. "I know who Atticus Wren is," she said. "I know what's in the attic. I know what it's worth. So you can take your $80,000, and you can drive back to wherever you came from, and if you knock on this door one more time, I am calling the sheriff." His face changed. It was a small change. The polite smile stayed, but the eyes went from cold to something else. Something flatter. "Mrs. Whitlock, I would think very carefully about this. I have. Get off my porch." He didn't move for a second. Then he did. She locked the door. She locked the chain. She sat down on the floor of the hallway because her legs had stopped working. She gave herself 10 minutes. Then she picked up her phone. She called 4 lawyers. The 4th one called her back within the hour. He listened. He told her not to sign anything, not to talk to anyone, not to let anyone inside the house. He told her he'd be in touch by the end of the day. Then she called Vance Holloway. She had to call the gallery 3 times. The first 2 times, an assistant told her Mr. Holloway didn't take calls from people he didn't know. The 3rd time she said this: "Tell him a woman in a farmhouse in West Virginia has 34 canvases signed a W. Tell him one of them is a young woman in a chair with her hands in her lap." The assistant put her on hold. She waited 8 minutes. Then a voice came on. Old, thin, but sharp. "This is Vance Holloway. Who am I speaking with?" "My name is Marigold Whitlock. I'm Augustus Whitlock's granddaughter-in-law." There was a long, long silence. Then Holloway said, very quietly, "I tried to find him for 40 years. Marigold closed her eyes. "He found you back," she said. "He left me a letter." Holloway's voice broke. He was an old man, and he had been carrying this for half a century. And a stranger in West Virginia had just told him the friend he had loved had not forgotten him. When he could speak again, he said, "How many paintings?" 34. "My God! There's also a journal, and letters, and 1 painting of my late husband as a child. My God! Mr. Holloway, there are men trying to buy this house. Right now. Today. They offered me $80,000. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone inside. Lock every door. I am getting on a plane tonight. 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 Mrs. Whitlock, listen to me. You are sitting on the largest unknown body of work by a major 20th century American painter. Do you understand what I am saying? I'm starting to. Do not leave the house. Do not let anyone inside. I will be there tomorrow." She hung up. She sat in the dust on the hallway floor with 1 hand on her belly and 1 hand flat against the wood. And for the first time since Thomas had died, she felt something in her chest she did not have a name for. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was something older than either of those. Felt like being held. 2 months later. The baby came on a Tuesday. Marigold gave birth in a hospital in Charleston with one hand wrapped around Vance Holloway's. Because by then, Vance Holloway was 83 years old, and he was the closest thing to family she had left. The baby was a girl. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair, eyes that wouldn't decide what color they wanted to be. She named her Elsie Augusta. Holloway cried when he heard the name. He didn't try to hide it. Here's what happened to the paintings. Holloway authenticated every one of them. All 34 were real. The earliest was from 1971. The latest had been finished 4 months before Augustus died. They were museum quality. They were better than anything Atticus Wren had shown in the years he'd been publicly working. He had gotten better in the silence. Grief, it turned out, had made him a greater painter than fame ever could have. Total estimated value at auction, $42 million. Marigold did not sell all of them. She sold 7. The 7 Holloway said were the strongest. The 7 that needed to be in museums, where people would actually see them. The auction raised just over $19 million after Holloway's commission, which he kept low because he insisted on it. The other 27 stayed. The painting of Elsie in the chair stayed. The painting of Thomas as a 6-year-old boy in the doorway stayed. The painting of the woman holding a baby in yellow light stayed. Marigold used part of the auction money to do something Augustus had never gotten around to. She rebuilt the house. Not flipped. Not modernized. Rebuilt the way it should have been a long time ago. The foundation was reinforced. The roof was replaced. The chimney was fixed. The kitchen got new floors and new windows that opened. The porch got its missing step back. The wallpaper with the brown roses came down. New paint went up. Same color. The same dark green Augustus had picked out in 1976. She'd found the original swatch in a kitchen drawer. The attic was rebuilt last. She had it insulated. She had a proper staircase put in. She had 3 more round windows installed so the light came in from every direction. She moved the chest into the corner where it had always been. She left the hook on the wall and the leather string on the hook. She did not put the key back. The key she wore around her neck. The man named Carter Reese went away. Holloway's lawyers wrote him a letter. He didn't write back. He didn't come back. Marigold heard, 6 months later, that he had been working as a scout for a New York dealer who specialized in acquiring undiscovered works from estates before the families understood what they had. 3 other families had taken his offers. 3 other families had signed papers for $40,000 or $50,000 and lost art worth tens of millions. Holloway said the dealer was being investigated now. He said it like a man who had waited a long time to see something done. Marigold didn't think about Carter Reese much after that. She thought about Augustus. She thought about Elsie. She thought about Thomas. She thought about all the years he had lived inside that family without knowing who he was, without knowing he had a grandfather in a farmhouse 40 years deep into the work of grieving for him. She thought about the day he must have opened the letter from Augustus, and the drive to the farmhouse, and what they must have said to each other in the one afternoon they had together. She would never know. Thomas had not told her. He had not told her because Augustus had asked him not to, and Thomas had loved Augustus the way you can only love a stranger who shows up in your life and tells you your real name. She forgave him for not telling her. Took her a while. But she got there. On the day Elsie Augusta turned 6 months old, Marigold carried her up the new attic stairs. The sun was coming through the round windows. The painting of Elsie in the chair hung on the far wall now, in a frame Holloway had picked out. The painting of Thomas as a boy hung next to it. The chest sat under them with the journal inside. Marigold walked across the floor to the spot where she had fallen through all those months ago. The new floorboards were tight and solid. She stood there for a long time holding her daughter, and she said this out loud. "Augustus, you did this. You hid it up here, all of it, and you waited for somebody. I don't know if you thought it would be Thomas or me or her, but it was us. We're here now. We came up the stairs. The baby slept on. Thomas, I'm not mad at you anymore. I get it. He asked you to keep it quiet and you did. You were a good man. You were always a good man. She paused. And you, little one, this is yours. This whole house. All these pictures. The name on the door. He left it for you. He left it for you before he even knew you were coming. I want you to remember that. There are people in this world who love you before they meet you. She put her hand on the wall. The wall was solid, painted that same dark green, holding a roof that wasn't going to fall in on her daughter. She had walked into this house 8 months ago expecting nothing but work and grief. She had expected to sell the place for $12,000 and disappear. She had fallen through a floor. She had climbed a set of stairs. And in an attic that everybody had given up on, she had found a man who hadn't. She had fallen through a floor. She had found everything.